Hello guys and welcome back to the channel. It's time for another special video. This time it's called Turkish Gambit. For many of you who are just wondering what Turkish Gambit is, it's so-called Elephant Gambit as well. Although we're just going to have like a very special approach today because I was asked especially to make this video by a guy who sponsored the book of an FM from Turkey. His name is Selim Gurcan, and this is a book, Turk Gambiti, or Turkish Gambit, or Elephant Gambit. And I just have to say that for a long time, I haven't seen a more refreshing and better book for like beginners or medium level players. The full book is like with not so much text, mainly with the diagrams all the time. And it is especially new type of approach of working books like this because you can easily just read that book by looking at diagrams. And then you don't need to go over the board, but basically you can just take a look and read the text like this. And by looking at the diagrams, remembering positions. Very lovely approach. I like it so much. No, I'm not advertising, but it's a great thing, and I really have to say and to give full compliments. So once again, the following analysis will be from the book Turkish Gambit or Elephant Gambit by FIDE master Selim Gurcan, and this video is special for Tolga Kishachikoglu, my student from Turkey, who asked me to do it, and of course I'm gonna do it with a big pleasure. Tolga, big greetings for you, buddy. So let's get started. What do we have here? After e4, e5, knight f3, it's always good, it's always interesting when you play some interesting, attractive gambit. In this case, it's Elephant Gambit, where you sack this pawn. And just like I told you, I'm going to cover all the lines that found that, place in the book. And we won't go too deep into these variations, but just like the main lines and the most important things. For example, of course that here, two main moves for white are knight e5 and e takes d5, but a little bit about these moves a little bit later. Let's first take a look at the worst possibility. For example, your opponent is a pretty weak guy. He just wants to defend the pawn, and he goes with the bishop d3. Then you take on e4, play f5, and now take a look at this. You can place your bishop anywhere else but to go on d3. When you go on d3, we just do fork, threatening both bishop and knight. But believe it or not, position isn't done yet. So they go with check, you go c6, threatening once again both of these pieces, and they go knight e5, threatening queen h5. And this is the moment where you shouldn't, get relaxed and play c takes b5, but and find the last move, queen f6. By making queen f6, you're just threatening to take knight on e5. Bishop on b5 is undefendable as well. No queen h5 should work because of g6, and black is winning. Then we gotta take a look at another sideline, knight to c3. Knight to c3 is something that is not usually, reminds me of Rai Lopez Gambit, where white just goes with knight c3. This time it's even worse. Usually you take on e4 and try to fight for the strong center. Here, you just push your pawn up to d4, and take a look at this. Knight has to go on e2. For example, if knight goes on d5, knight is out of the game and it's lost. So they gotta go and they gotta put the knight back on e2, and you just play f6. It's a very special thing to defend this pawn on e5, not by knight c6, but actually by playing f6. What's so special about f6? First of all, you create and kind of structure strong pawn structure here, and the pawn chain stretched from g7 to d4. And second thing, when they play knight g3, imagine if you played knight c6 here. Now you would have to deal with bishop b5, which would be very annoying for both knight on c6 and pawn on e5. But here, you actually go with f6, and when you play f6, you have a strong pawn structure, you have a good and very connected pawns, healthy one, and when they play knight g3, they're hoping for bishop c4 desperately, and the move that you have to remember is specialty bishop e6. Bishop e6 is aimed against bishop c4. It's so strong for you, and they have lots of problems. What's the point here? When you play bishop e6, they can't play bishop c4. They can go with bishop e5, but since the author of this book said that this is the book mainly for guys stretched from 1200 to 1800, which I believe is absolutely and accurately a very good assessment for whose guys you should actually use it. After like bishop e6, for example, bishop e2, what do? You play queen d7. You line up these pieces, you create a battery, and after d3, you go for c5, you go for knight c6, go for bishop d6, play knight g and e7, and just like you see, you launch the attack with king f7, rook a g8, g5, and just push these pawns onto the king side like crazy, and you're about to crush your opponent so bad. I very much like the following type of approach. Reminds me of Servan's line, just reversed with the black pieces. Here, it also reminds me of all those English setup against Sicilian openings where you just simply push all your pawns onto the opponent's king and go with the attack. Then another thing, instead of bishop e2, could be bishop e5 check. Bishop e5 check makes sense because bishop e5 is, of course, you won't play knight c6 or knight d7 because in that case they would develop bishop, take the knight with tempo, play d3 and play normal game. But you actually play c6, kicking the bishop away. Bishop has to go back in order to be swapped off for the knight, for the bishop on e6. And now your knight goes on a6. It's a very special move. What's so special about knight a6? You're harassing that bishop on a4 with knight c5, which means that what has to go with bishop e3, you take and boom, you go with d3. A very sneaky move by black where you absolutely break white's pawn structure, break these pawns, and afterwards by playing knight c5 or knight b4, create lots of weaknesses in the white's camp, in white's pawn structure, and afterwards manage to somehow break his position. I very much like this approach, and black seems to be better. By the way, the following type of position with bishop e6 you have from e4 d5, and this is how you also can get this type of the game. So when they play knight c3, you go d4, knight e2, you go e5, knight f3, and you go f6, having the same type of position. Then there is another variation by white. It's aligned with d3. d3 is a very passive setup. For example, you're unfamiliar with d takes c4, d takes c4, queen d1 in general with endgames, or let's just call them queenless type of middle games. And in that case, you don't want to trade the queens off. For many of you, I believe that a very good approach could be to play knight c6 to defend the central pawn on e5 and to give them possibility to take on d5, in which case when you capture by queen on d5 and play knight c3, you will pin this knight on c3 with the bishop b4. Very logical way of playing by black. So after bishop d2, you capture, play knight f6. And what I like about the following position is planned by black. It's castles, castles, and queen goes back to d6. It's not only important to learn first couple of moves, but I believe for you guys, one of the crucial things and thing of a crucial importance should be to know what to do and where to place your pieces right after the opening. So that first stage or first phase right after the opening. So here you see light square bishop goes on f5, maybe wants to support some e4 breaks, maybe wants to pressure some d3 at some point. Your knight should be going on d5, harassing that bishop on c3, and both of your rooks should be going on the most logical and the most active squares, rook from f8 goes on e8, while the rook from a8 goes on d8. I very much like that one, and that's a nice one. Also, keep in mind that a light square bishop may go with, to b6, and afterwards to go on b7, going with some even f5 and launching some sort of the kingside attack, maybe the queen on d6, maybe going to g6 at some point, altogether with that bishop on b7. I was just explaining you some ideas and how to carry on seemingly normal position. Black is absolutely fine. Then many of these guys can just go with pretty wild approach, d4. Opens up the center, gives you everything, but here you just take on d4, and they just have to take by queen on d4. Taking by knight makes no sense because you take the pawn on e4. So when they play queen takes d4, you play knight c6. I very much like this one, knight c6. Knight c6 threatens the queen on d4, and after that, queen takes d5, and after queen takes d5, e takes d5, knight b4. It's one of those queenless type of middle games where you threaten the pawn on d5, threaten the pawn on c2, where they have to go with bishop b5. You maybe break your queenside possibilities for a castle, but they still have lots of problems with both pawn on c2 and pawn on d5. After knight e5, king e8, don't worry, it's not the end of the world. So after knight a3, you don't get the pawn immediately on d5, but first kick the knight away from the center, play knight takes d5, find a place for your king on f7, while your knight from g8 mainly should be going on e7, and afterwards plays both of your rooks to e8 and d8 with absolutely fine game for black. And just like you see, we've seen all these side variations and all these side possibilities pretty much solved easily, in an easy fashion and without much problems. Of course, that when you play Turkish Gambit or this Elephant Gambit, that most of these guys will take on d5 or take by knight on e5. So what are we supposed to do when they play e takes d5? When that happens, you just go with e4. You kick the knight away, and that's one of the highlights of this variation. By playing e4, you're kicking the knight away, and now it's white's turn. Practically there's only one move here. For white, it's queen e2. But apart from that, let's take a look at other possibilities. On low levels, and that's what I like about the book, it gives even those type of moves that, for example, I wouldn't cover in my regular lectures, but I believe this could be a refreshing idea, even for my videos. For example, what to do against bishop b5. Many times your opponents just all of a sudden make some bishop b5 and you're confused. Like, you don't have that on the video. What am I supposed to do? Well, knight on f3 is hanging. Well, there is a time and there is a chance to go after the bishop on b5 as well. So after d takes, b takes, two pieces are hanging, you're completely winning. There is one lovely, very lovely continuation here. After queen e2, you take the bishop, they give check. Looks like they're about to win the rook back. But no, that won't happen because you play queen e7. Queen cannot take because the king is pinned, and we're just winning. So we won a piece, and the game should be easily winning for black. Apart from that, there is another type of possibility, knight d4. After knight e4, I've seen this move. Honestly speaking, I tried this gambit a couple of times, and a couple of times I faced this knight e4. You play queen takes d5, threatening the knight on d4. They gotta move it back, and now they have this tempo move, knight c3, where the queen kind of looks a little bit, like simply stupidly, I would say, placed in the center. But you don't have to worry. You can actually take advantage of this queen and place the queen into the center of the board e5, which is going to do what? First of all, fight against any d4 because of en passant ideas. Then you're just going to be able to line up your queen and the bishop and create a battery, very dangerous battery against the h2 once they go for a short castle, which is going to be problematic for them. And finally, with the queen on e5, you're just avoiding knight c3 ideas by white. So after like knight c3, knight f6, bishop e2, knight c6, you don't create a battery till they castle. Once they make castle, you just go with bishop d6. You're threatening to take on h2 to give checkmate. And when they go g3, this could be a good puzzle for all of you. Find a move to come up with the attack and create some sort of action here for black. Of course, it should be h5, threatening h4, threatening to take on g3, and afterwards to simply crush your opponent. For example, let me just show you what may happen. In the book, he covered d4. But let's say they just play, but what else are they going to do but d4? I mean, it looks like the most logical thing. And after d4, queen f5, your queen wants to go on h3 and wants to support the attack by knight g4 or h4 afterwards. So after d5, a very lovely way of continuing the attack with the knight g4. And when they take the knight, you just go with h4. So it's a very lovely continuation. You threaten h takes g4, h takes g3, queen h2 is mate. They can't push this pawn because queen h2 is mate, and this is a very nice way of even mating some of your opponents in the future. Just like you see, those are very typical methods of creating attack, and that's another thing that you can practice with these kinds of variations and in this type of lines. There is also another type of a thing, for example, knight e5. Knight e5, bringing the knight into the center, don't seem to be that good, but believe it or not, it's certainly better than knight takes knight d4, which we've seen in previous variation. You take on d5, you threaten this knight, they gotta go d4 to defend it, you take en passant, knight is hanging, knight has to capture, in a way it blocks the pawn, this knight is not happily placed piece there, I'd say, and you just go with knight c6. Afterwards, I'd like to go with knight f6, bishop d6, maybe this bishop goes here or here, maybe long castle, maybe short castle. That is going to depend on your opponent and his moves as well. And just like you see, we've seen all these possibilities and time to check the main line queen e2. On queen e2, we have to play knight f6. Here, white has so many possibilities. I believe that the most logical thing that you're going to face in your games will be knight to g5 or d3. I also believe knight c3 could happen in your games. This knight g5 threatens to get the pawn immediately on e4, but then you have a specialty queen d5. Queen d5 overprotects the pawn on e4, threatens this knight on g5, and now they have to defend it. What's better by playing d3, where bishop on c1 defends the knight and attacks the pawn on e4. So after bishop e4 check, c3, a very lovely continuation. That's another thing that I like about the analysis in the book, because many times he just gives these very attractive opportunities to attack, to go for tactics, not the most, I'd say, precise and maybe not the most sound in many of these lines, but that's exactly what players arranged from, for example, 1200 to 1800 need. You need a little bit of imagination, a little bit of bluff, a bit of, like going for attractiveness and active games, to care much about the activity in your games much more than just playing the most solid computerish type of moves. So after like c takes b4, it takes d3, you're down a piece, rook e8, you can't play bishop e2, of course, because queen is hanging, so they gotta go with bishop e3, and after, by the way, if king d1, you just play queen e5, and look at this position, you threaten knight g4, bishop f5, bishop g4, followed by knight c6 for kd8 afterwards. Simply, they can't keep the pressure, and they cannot defend themselves successfully enough in position like this. You gotta practice this type of piece sacrifices where you play for initiative, where you just sacrifice a piece without anything that concrete, but your activity and your initiative is so big that they can barely defend that. That's one thing. Another thing is bishop e3, you just go with the queen g5. Queen on g5, just won a piece. King is under the pin, bishop as well. So after knight c3, bishop f5, queen b5, he gave one game there. So after like knight c6, long castles, rook takes c3, what else? I mean, it's so logical in this type of games. Rook d8, pinning this rook on d2. And after this, queen f4, he literally doesn't have a move. He has to play g3 to kick it away. Knight b4, threatening some knight d3 ideas here, for example. And after this, knight g4, take a look at this sad position for white. I very much like black's game here. Look at these knights. Look at the monster position of the rook on d8 and queen on g5. But probably the most monstrously placed pieces in the game was bishop on f5. Everything, thanks to that bishop, the whole initiative and everything else was happening because of the bishop on f5 and inability of white's king to simply, at some point, run away from the pin and go onto the classic b1 square. We've seen knight g5. What happens if they go with the knight c3? Well, knight c3, you just play bishop e7. And here they have knight takes e4. And in the book, it was given as one of the main approaches by white. And I fully agree. Who would play knight g5, where you anyways play castles, play rook e8, going after some sort of x-rays against the queen, king, and the knight on the e-file. And after d3, you get a pawn back. You also threaten some f5. So after knight d5, queen d5, bishop e3, f5, you pin it, you take it, and play f4. A very simple way of winning that bishop on b4. Everything was going down with tempo, and here white didn't find a way to simply defend that piece. You can take a look at all these lines at home a couple of times, and to make sure, for example, you sacked one pawn. Now you're about to sack another pawn after knight e4, and you play castle. But what kind of compensation do you have for the given material? You have a good activity of your pieces. You definitely have way safer king than the king on e1. And all we want to do here is to go with some rook e8, threatening some knight takes e4, followed by bishop f or bishop d6. So in this position, they can take on f6. They can play c4 to defend the pawn on d5, or play d3. I believe c4 is a very logical thing. You can't take any longer on d5 by knight or by queen. But now you take on e4 and play rook e8. I always like to use, and I'm fond of this kinds of x-rays in chess, especially when the queen and the king are in the same file, and that just gives you a very great and a very obvious tactical chances on the open file. So after bishop e2, you play bishop c5, threatening the queen, play queen e7, not allowing him to castle, and using the deflection because he cannot take because of checkmate and because of this beautiful battery like this. A very lovely analysis, very lovely book with lots of tricks, and just like I told you, and once again I'm gonna repeat, that was very refreshing to me. So after like d3, if d3 happens, you just go with rook e8. Rook goes onto the open file, fights against the knight, queen, and the king, and now they just have to see what to do. They can play bishop e3 or bishop d2. If bishop d2, you take by knight. When you take by knight, you all of a sudden have f5 threats. So queen, king, and the knight are on the same file, and it's almost lethal by black. And when you play knight d5, you also threaten when they play long castles. For example, you can go with some f5, but don't do that. I mean, there is some crazy move here, h4, that is going to all of a sudden might even jeopardize your king on g8. But actually go with a5. What's so special about a5? Well, the thing that you can go with the knight c6, knight b4, bishop can go here. Your dark square bishop can move wherever you like. f5, bishop f6, bishop goes back on f8, and then you're about to create an attack on the queen side. After a5, d4, knight c6, c3, bishop f5. Take a look at this position. Black just has greatly placed pieces into the center. Rook on e file, king on c1 is definitely weak, and if you ask me what would I play here with the black pieces, I would definitely go with a4, knight a5, and knight b3 as one of the main ideas. I also see many other ideas, but I just told you this is, for example, what you play with your friend. You set up a position like this on the board, and then you start playing games, and afterwards, when you finish them, you can just analyze them, and that's how you go in depth and in better understanding of a certain type of games and attacks in chess. There is another thing. Instead of bishop d2, if they play bishop e3, you take on d5, castles, and here I didn't put a red circles on all white pieces. I'm talking about the king on e1, queen on e2, bishop on e3, and knight on e4. I didn't put the red circles just like that. All you want to do is f5 and basically to crush and to win one of these minor pieces into the white's game. After long castles f5, they can't play anything but knight e2, and you don't have to rush. You don't have to play f4 immediately. All you have to do, complete your development. Usually I teach my students who are just on a beginners or medium level, you're going to have way better chances in the attacks if you simply develop all your pieces and then do the attack, then going straight into the attack without all pieces, like simply participating into the attack. That's why, for example, rather than some knight b4, rather than some f4, keep on developing yourself. That's a crucial thing for your chess. Develop yourself. So after knight c6, g3, knight b4, threatening knight a2, knight c3 to win the queen, king b1, bishop f6. Take a look at this. Now 3 of your pieces just joined into the attack. Rook is on the open file. Queen is there bad. You threaten some f4 if you want. But on top of all that, he came up with a beautiful finish here, which came with the knight c3. I very much like this tactics. Take a look at this one. Rook, bishop, knight, and knight against this king on b1 and queen on e2. B takes c3. Knight goes there. And now you can't defend knight c3 with check. They have to move the king or the queen. Then you take on c3 and go with the queen e7. They can't stop checkmate. What a beautiful position by black. All these pieces just joined the attack, and just once again I'm going to repeat for, I believe, like 10th time today. Just carry on, develop your pieces way rather and way better than just going into the attack without, for example, completing your development firstly. And finally, if in this position they go with knight takes f6, I don't think it should scare us, but it makes sense. Taking on f6 makes sense. At first glance, looks like, why do we play like this? Why would we play like this? Because now he threatens to win the queen on the spot. No, he can move the queen back to d1, but looks like it's not enough. Not because of rook e8, but because of queen d5. What's so special about the queen d5? There's no knight to go after that queen with the knight c3. So after bishop e2, you maintain control of the center, where the pawn on c5 and bishop on f6 will take full control over the d4 outpost. After castles, knight c6, d3, b6, c3, bishop b7, rook a d8. You can't tell me that you simply don't enjoy this type of the game. You have one position that is pointing out at the king side, have another position that is doing the same just on the queen side. You have well centralized queen. You're down a pawn, but you have a great pressure against the d3 pawn, and that just what differentiates this game and makes it so easy and so much better for black. I wouldn't say black is so special here, but what I like about it, I like this compensation, full activity of black pieces, and certainly if I had to choose, I would choose black pieces. Another thing is queen c4. Queen c4 just defends, but at the same time opens up possibility for bishop e2 and short castle. Rook e8, bishop e2, and here I like a suggestion from the book. It's b5. b5 is very nice. You can take by queen because of bishop a6, and they're nice x-rays on the e file and attack by the bishop on a6 onto the bishop on e2. That's why they have to play queen to d3. You go c5. I also like this one a lot. So when you definitely threaten c4. Queen is almost trapped. They gotta take. You take on d3 and take a look at this. They can't play castle. You just lock these bishop on c1 by simply doubling these white pawns on d2 and d3. And after knight c6, bishop f5, black's position is looking just so nice. For example, one guy played rook b1 in order to do something with that rook, and after rook takes c2, very lovely exchange sacrifice, went for bishop d3, knight b4, threatening mate, and here bishop e2 would be mate. Another nice lovely game given in the book. And somehow I like these mating patterns, these typical sacrifices that went throughout the book in many diagrams and puzzles, and that's what make it looking interesting even for my level. So in case of d4, you just go bishop g4, c3, queen d5. Just like you see, he just wants to complete his development, but you just want to go with full, like activity of your pieces. Certainly this is one of the better variations for white, because at least he somehow managed to develop himself. But of course, it shouldn't mean that the position should be immediately bad for us. Maybe you can put the bishop back to d8, maybe break with some f5, go after the queen and the bishop. They're pretty solid, but if we have to say something, yes, we do have a compensation. Yes, we're down a pawn, but we have some sort of initiative here. And just like you see, we've seen all these possibilities. Time to check the main line and move that I teach my students to play with white pieces. It's knight takes e5. If knight takes e5, you have to play bishop d6 with black. You threaten this knight. For example, makes no sense to play nothing else but e4, because if you bring the knight back, d takes e4, queen e2, knight f6, knight c3 cancels. And now you can't take on e4 because you would just lose the queen, of course. It's more than obvious. And if you play like knight d4, then we go with the bishop g4. You can't play f3 because of rook e8, once again losing the queen, going with the bishop c5 afterwards, and having a great initiative for the rest of the game. Just like you see, position for black looks, in a classic sense of that word, more than dubious, but it's actually, I believe it's completely lost. If knight takes f7, like let's play crazy, I took one pawn, let me took another, let me just go for the third pawn. Doesn't matter. You just hide your king on g7. Yes, at first glance, he does have like 3 pawns for the piece, but we have like 4 minor pieces. We have like 4 minor pieces that are about to get like fully developed and fully active. So look at this. Bishop c4 threatens mate, almost mate in 2 moves. Bishop, queen f7, king h6 and d4. You play queen e7, threatening some knight f6, going after the queen and the pawn. So after like castles, knight f6, now you can get the pawn back, but let me first go with this one, queen a3. Let me go with check. And this is what usually happens when you have like full activity of pieces. Here they can't play king h2 because of king h2, knight g4. But if they play king h1, you just play knight g4 again. It opens up a chance for the queen h4. They have to play here, so you can't play queen h4 because of queen f7, but you're first going to make intermediary move. Intermediary moves in chess are so important. If queen h3, you have knight f2 and the bishop is gonna take the queen. If queen e2, you have queen h4, which is another typical mating method and mating type of attack and mating pattern by black. So all things considered, they in this position have to go with d4. They have to go with d4. It's so good. It's so logical. And when we take, they should go with the bishop c4. There is also a possibility for white that goes with knight c3 in the book. It's logical, it's developing, it's normal. We take on e5, take on d1, and after king d1, knight c6. In this relatively equalish type of the game, we gotta make one difference. They're first going to take the pawn on e4. Yes, we can get a pawn back, but that gives them a bit of initiative. Although king on d1 is something that should give us initiative here. So I don't care about getting the pawn immediately on e5, but we go with bishop f5, bishop d3. Watch out, they threaten knight d6 to go after the bishop, and you have to go with bishop g6. In the book, it was given castle, but no, you shouldn't be going with castle because of knight d6. Go with bishop g6, put the knight back, threaten knight b4, knight takes e5, long castles, and after f4, because they defend the pawn, so you can't take it anymore, not a big problem. We go with the long castles, we threaten f6 with a great activity, and we also threaten bishop e4 at the moment. We threaten knight b4, and if you ask me, they have lots of problems. Finally, when you play d takes e4, bishop c4. Bishop c4, they threaten f7. You've got nothing better and nothing else but to take on e5. And now they can take on e5 by pawn. They gotta play queen h5. Not many guys will find it, for example, who are confronted with this line for the first time. They will most likely play d takes e5. Then you take, develop your knight with tempo, threaten the pawn. They go bishop f4, check with tempo. And if king d2, long castles, king e3, knight e4, threatening both, knight f5, knight c2. And after this, take a look at this lovely mate into the center of the board. Or if king c1, you just go with the knight g and e7. This knight is heading for a g6, threatening bishop and pawn. Rook e1, knight g6, bishop g3. Get the pawn back. And when they take and say, okay, but look what's happening with your knight. Nothing, buddy. I'm playing castle, and I'm the first one who's threatening mate here. You can't take my knight. You can't touch my piece. It's untouchable. You can't do anything because I'm just threatening mate on d1. So this actually tells us that I have to go with the queen h5. Queen h5 gives them threat of queen f7 mate and threatening the bishop. Thing is queen e7. If d takes e5, just play knight c6 with the queens on the board. With a little bit better placed queen on e7 than the one on h5, we shouldn't complain about this type of the game. That's why queen takes e5 is the best for white. I remember having one student from England, Sam was his name, and Sam was won a game with the white pieces like this, and he said, it was good that you showed me how to treat the elephant gambit. Although here, I'm just going to show you what was given in the book as even more accurate and maybe more interesting type of variation for black. So after queen e5, d takes e5, knight c6, you're threatening the pawn on e5. So after bishop f4, you just go with knight g and e7. That knight usually goes on g6, harassing the bishop, and at the same time going after e5 pawn. After knight c3, knight g6, bishop g3, taking pawn on e5, threatening this bishop, and after bishop e3, bishop d7. Knight e4, he needs to get a pawn back. He needs to do that. And when he takes it, bishop c6. I like this variation for black. Somehow, at first glance, bishop pair should be one of the main assets by white in this type of game. Although there is a problem here. We're now threatening to take the knight and pawn on g2. They have to play f3. And all we have to make sure in order to compensate the advantage of the bishop pair that was, of course, in white's hands, is take on e4 and create 3 pawn islands. First, second, third. Against playing with this pair of knights, against pair of bishops, but a little bit weaker pawn structure because he's got like 3 pawn islands and we do have 2, I believe it fully compensates black's chances in this type of queenless middle game. After like h5, threatening bishop, they gotta go h4. After like a5, going with a4, they go with a4. You play rook to d8. And if you ask me, I would even choose and prefer black pieces. I once again would like to congratulate to this guy who made this very nice book. So FM Gortsan from Turkey. To thank my student Tolga Kishachikoglu, who asked me to do it. It's very interesting. He came to Serbia. He was my guest there, and he brought me this book as a gift. and asked me, Maya, could you do it? And I said, of course, Tolga, I'm gonna do it, and that's gonna be with a big pleasure. Sorry for that, but you've been waiting for this video for so long, but what can I say? At least and finally it came. Guys, enjoying the analysis, enjoying Elephant Gambit or Turkish Gambit, and hope you're gonna have so many wins with it. Subscribe and sometimes even donate something. Thanks so much and see you next time.